Hi everyone. Today we're going to cover one of the fantasies of chess fans all over the world. A private match between the top two players on the planet behind closed doors, meaning no noise, no fans, no live broadcast, just pure chess. For the background, the two were playing at the Tal Memorial earlier in the day, and in the post-match conference, a reporter, namely Macaulay Pearson, shout out to him, I assume jokingly, asked Magnus whether he would ever play Hikaru in an informal match, which he took seriously, and that's how everything took place. So, without further ado, let's go. So, I have to tell a few things to you. Firstly, that this match was consisting of 40 matches, which was played from 10 p.m. allegedly all until 4 a.m., which is, very crazy. This game was game 38, which means that it was played around 4 a.m. to be able to even find legal moves at this time, having played for so long, is already nothing short of a miracle. So let's actually look at the position. Hikaru is playing white, and it's white to move, and you can just see that Hikaru has an extra rook, but Magnus has 2 pawns and a knight, so materially they're equal. However, some things are just above the number of the material we have. Look at this pawn structure. It's absolutely horrendous. All of these pawns are targets, they're weak, and everything. For black, this pawn is weak, yes, but you cannot take it right now, because if you take, I'll play knight c4 check, winning your rook. So, Hikaru played the move king c1, getting out of this check, and now genuinely threatening to take on g6. So, we just simply defended with our rook, and now hit this rook as well. Now, Hikaru moves the rook out of the way, onto the open file, eyeing some checks perhaps to maybe pick up this pawn. Here, Magnus thinks for a few seconds, and just takes on c3, a very nice move. Many people would say, oh no, they're gonna infiltrate or whatever. Just don't worry about these things, because after the move knight takes c3, we're also eyeing knight c2 check, winning the rook. So if you play rook up to d7, I can just simply attack your rook, and you cannot take because knight e2 just simply wins your rook. So after the move knight takes c3, the move rook e1 was played, just attacking this pawn and also defending against knight e2 checks. The king moves up to defend. Chess is very simple. You create a threat, they defend it, and create another threat, you defend it, and that's how the game goes. Now Hikaru, with a very, very confident face, just brings the rook into the 7th rank, something you should always also strive to do, but the position is very far from manageable. The pawn just simply moves up, and you can see how everything is almost defended. Every single pawn almost is just defended, and that is how good you have to really get to be like Magnus Carlsen. Now the rook goes to a7, attempting to fix the pawn on a5 and weaken the b5 square, making it more difficult to push. However, this pawn is now fixed, and the next move I just simply will take it, and I have one pass pawn over here, one pass pawn going from here, and one pass pawn going through here. How are you going to stop these? The rook goes now to a8, and the pawn goes to the e4 square, freeing this e5 square, perhaps, if some checks come in, so you can just zigzag your way away from the checks. Rook f8 check was played anyway, king e5, now rook f1. So, sort of stopping this way out, and now Magnus takes. What is going to stop him? The king is not really unsafe, because your checks are just going to free up some other squares the king can go to, and I'm just going to push, right? I'm just going to push. I'm simply going to push. I'm not going to do much else. I don't need to touch anything else. Rook goes check, and we just simply block. Trading would definitely benefit black, so the rook goes to g8. Now we move our knight to c3, so not really, you can never really go to g1 anymore because of this fork. So the king now goes to d2, covering e2. Now the knight just drops back to e5, and now rook g1, hitting g6. This time there is no tactic, you just have to defend it, and you gotta go back, hitting the rook. So we think, well, is Hikaru making progress? Sort of, but it's nothing really substantial. As we just defend everything, this weak point, we're just going to start pushing our pawns. And now I'll actually draw your attention to this. Look at this. Every single piece is defended. Every single one of them. The knight is defended, the rook is defended, everything. That is a sign of a good endgame player. Always try to keep your pieces defended, all of them if possible. Now, the rook goes to e8, trying to put some pressure over there, but it's nothing substantial. And that's simply f4. These pawns are going to go forward. And not to mention this a5 pawn, it's sleeping, waiting for its time to enter the game. Now, The rook goes to g5 with check, and for whatever reason, Magnus does not play the natural knight to f5, instead just blunders the pawn on f4, and after rook f8, king g7, loses the pawn on f4. Now the position is very, very more defendable, however, it's still winning for black. e3 check. The king goes to e2, now king h6, defending this pawn, and also like eyeing something, you know, over here. The rook jumps back, possibly trying to, you know, eye the promotion square over here. Knight f5, activating the knight. You know, you just take a step back, I go forward. That is exactly how it works. Now the pawn goes to c3, eyeing some of these checks over here. Now just rook d3, rook d6 rather. We're finding another square to penetrate on. Now just rook d1, simply, we cannot let them do that. We're just going to stop it. Rook goes to c6, hitting the pawn on c3, and a rook c3. So, yeah, you said you were now stuck to everything, right? Remember this pawn I had? Remember this pawn I had, Hikaru? I took on a4 many moves ago? b5. Look at this. We're now going forward. Now Hikaru thinks he's getting material maybe here. Rook d5, but now I just trade simply the pawns, and I go rook c2 check. Now your king has to choose. Is it going to go forward? That is definitely not going to happen. Basically, this is going to go over here or here or here. It goes to e1, and now check, the more important decision. Are you going to move away from this pawn and closer to this one? Or are you going to do the opposite? Hikaru does the opposite, just stays in touch with the pawn. Now Magnus plays the inaccurate knight to d4, essentially, like if you want to look at the evaluation bar, it was, if you want to look at everything, for all the moves, let me just put it in for a second, it's 0.5, which is not winning. If you look at the moves before, you see -5, which is crazy, right? Even though they're just only one pawn up, 1 point up, rather. But it's just the activity of the pieces. But after rook d2, king e1, knight d4, there was only one move also to get to this situation, to be able to sort of defend everything. And that is the move rook to e5. Hikaru had like 4 seconds on the clock and just resigned in this position. But had he played rook e5, he could have defended the position if he had more time. Magnus had like a minute and 15. So it definitely just shows who was the better Blitz player at the time. Here, like, you have to defend the pawn. Now rook d3. And I will just go here, simply just creating a fortress on the 4th rank. The king cannot go forward. The knight is hit. The pawn is stuck. And this pawn is also very difficult to push forward because I'm currently pressuring here. If you try to go knight f5, I can just hang around. For example, rook e6, you know, some ideas, hitting this guy, everything is protected, This is some sort of a fortress. However, just Hikaru didn't play this, and at this position just threw in the towel and resigned. Thanks for watching so far. I hope you enjoyed it and perhaps learned something from it in the world of endgames. I also have other videos, mostly on openings, which you can look at here. Thanks for watching so far. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you later.